Okay, so here's the thing about the NAS Compares channel. I've talked about it a bunch of times before. We did the reviews, the guides, the free support, all that stuff. But at the same time, in the background of NAS Compares, I actually have another life. I provide support to different resellers, I give support to different brands, and I work with different technical teams in the background. But another thing I do from time to time is brands reach out to me and send me their hardware for me to evaluate. I produce a little report about it, the things I like, things I don't. Ultimately, as someone that looks at a lot of NAS devices, actually quite a lot of fun. And sometimes some of the things that get sent to me in the background, I never get to make a video about because they've been sent to me in advance and they go through multi-stages of production in the lifetime before they go in, end up at full retail that you guys get to get your hands on them at Amazon and the like. Now, last year, I got to visit a bunch of different Chinese-based manufacturers in their HQs, and one of them was Beelink. It was one of my favourite visits. It was really, really informal. It was one of the few that I visited that didn't just give me unlimited access to anything around the place that I wanted, but they answered my questions with so much technical nous that it made me even more intrigued to ask the next question. Which brings me to this. This is a NAS that we've been talking about now for almost a year, but it's still not available. This is the Beelink 4-bay NAS, the first of a series of compact 4-bay NAS devices that Beelink are working on. Do you remember Beelink? The first big hit they had was that, the Beelink Mini, the ME Mini 6-bay M.2 NVMe flash NAS, and after that there was that compact little 2-bay with removable slot. And around the whole time they were talking about a new 4-bay. Now, an enormous disclaimer early doors, and the whole reason for that long, boring, chatty intro. This is not the final product. This is a prototype that they have sent me. It's still going through a lot of the QA, going through the QC, going through the burn-in test, going through all kind of pressure-sensitive work going over in Beelink. And again, watch our Beelink headquarters video if you want to see a lot of that workflow and what they do with the aging and stuff like that. This is a first revision prototype of the NAS they're working on. It is coming out. There are eventually going to be not only an ARM and an x86 variation of it, there's going to be an AMD and an Intel processor version of it. This is designed with that same compact nature that the 2-bay has. And I spoke with the brand and asked them politely and nicely if, after doing the evaluation for this that I was doing anyway, that I could get to show it with you. They didn't want me to because they said it's not the finished product, and so the only reason I can show it to you is I had to add this big thing at the beginning. But the first thing I want to talk about is the size, obviously. Oh, surprise, Beelink, I didn't tell you I was going to do this. Here is just to give you some perspective of the size of this 4-bay, because we've talked about it with a 2-bay already, but here we have the QNAP TS464, we have the Synology DS925 Plus, and we have a Ugreen 4-bay NAS here. Although it's the white one from China, they're all the same chassis, whether it's the N100 version all the way up to the more powerful Ryzen system there. And immediately, the scale of this NAS side by side, at the front, you would be forgiven for thinking, do you know what? It's not that big, but it's the depth. It is pretty much how much is inside this small device. Now, the QNAP is probably the closest one there is, comparing them. But there is so much more hardware inside this device that the fact that they're still this scale side by side with how much is under the bonnet here, comparing it against this 2022-2023 series NAS, is something we've really got to dig into. Now, just like the others, you access the trays by the back. It's a 4-bay NAS device. It's still using exactly the same trays. It's got that thermal pad. You've got screw holes for the drives. You do need to screw them in. It's not click and load. And each one of the trays is numbered. The bottom tray here is where all of our interesting hardware is. Now, again, this is the unfinished prototype, so do not be surprised if the port arrangement alignment changes, the cooling fan moves around, anything like that. I think the base level hardware on this model is pretty much identical to what the final retail one's going to be, but there's almost certainly going to be changes pending a lot of that internal testing there happening in the background. One of the things I'm really interested in doing in the final version of this, because I have tested it using my N150 ME Pro 2-bay, is the ability to chop and change the thing at the bottom. So, for example, let's say, and I've just put the screw there, let's say you purchased a 2-bay when it launched. Later on down the road, you want to upgrade the storage. This system allows you to remove this from your 2-bay model and slot it directly inside the 4-bay. In just the chassis. Now, I've spoken to the brand about whether they're going to be rolling out this solution in just a chassis form, and it's something they're investigating currently. They're just not sure who would need it and if they would need it at this stage, because the 2-bay is not even a year old at this point. But the idea that you could have a 2-bay NAS and not have to buy a whole new NAS to migrate, but you could have the 2-bay and just buy this shell of a 4-bay that has that input there at the back, and you just slot in your existing board, take the 2 drives you've got and pop it in this 4. That's tremendously appealing. But alongside the 4 bays there, we've also got 3 M.2 NVMe's. Now, you may have noticed up to this point, I've not mentioned the CPU. Now, that's intentional because, as mentioned, there's going to be multiple CPUs, and just like the 2-bay that rocks out with the N95 and I think the N97 alongside the N150 and now the Intel 304, Intel Core 3, this system, the one I've got here at least, has the M15 series CPUs. It's a 4-bay NAS with 3 M.2 NVMe's. 2 of them are Gen 3 times 1, so again you're looking at 800 to 900 megs, and one of them is Gen 3 times 2. So you're looking at 1.5 to 1.6 gigabytes per second there. So it is well put together, with this being a 16 gigabyte version as well, but the 16 gig is not delivered via a SODIMM, it is delivered directly onto the board, LPDDR5. Again, because this hasn't been confirmed to be the final release, I don't know if the final release will arrive with memory in that fashion. But when you look at the other 2-bays, some of them do arrive with 12 gig or 16 gig of attached LPDDR5. So there's a decent possibility that that is what's going to transpire here. Also, you'll note that fan there on the top there. When you slide this back in, let's put that into the guide rails there. Let's get that right so I don't knacker this system moving forward. I've finished my prototype review, so if it does break, oh well. But underneath the individual drive bays, just like the 2-bay model, what an unpleasant noise that is, we have got a vent panel there right at the back where that fan immediately draws the air. But keep in mind that the base level panel there has not only heat sinks for pulling the heat away from those drives that controls the NAND into this metal panel here to dissipate it there, but it is a single fan operation with a vapor chamber there at the rear. Now, ports and connectivity on the M150 version, I'm sad to say there isn't any 10 gig on this prototype. I'm gonna have to keep saying it, but it does arrive with 2.5 gig and 5 gig there on the base. Almost certainly, just like the 304 2-bay model, there is going to be 10 gig variations of this, and no doubt when they go down that more aggressive Ryzen one that they talked about in their press release, I'll link that below, that will arrive with at least a couple of 10 gigs there on board. But because this is the M150, it doesn't have any Thunderbolt, it's only got 10 gig USB, it's got HDMI 4K 60 frames, but it's got 2.5 gig and 5 gig there on the rear, which may present something of a throttle in some cases, but still, when you've only got 9 lanes of CPU to play with there, you make the best of it. Now, just like the 2-bay, it still takes advantage of that Marshall speaker look in front there. There's a USB there at the base along with the power button, and you've got that mesh front panel there, delivered into underneath there, by the way, an M.2 for Wi-Fi connectivity there. Just like the 2-bay, there's absolutely no way that's going to design change at all. They're too in love with this design, and it does the job. This is effectively the 2-bay model with 2 extra drives there on the top, which has always been kind of a requirement to take advantage of any kind of performance benefits. And that 2-bay that had 2 hard drive bays, 2 SATA hard drive bays, and 3 M.2 bays there. The idea of having 4 hard drives, 3 M.2 NVMe on a system of this scale is going to be really impressive. But one thing I am going to hold fire on is my hopes and dreams towards thermals on this, because let's face it, that is a lot being crammed into a box, even if it is metal all the way around with the dissipating panel there at the base, the vent vapor chamber. This is not quite the same as that 2-bay. It's going to be more bigger hard drives, and if you go for like larger drives, if you can get hold of big hard drives in 2026, I'm using some 24 TBs because apparently I'm the luckiest man in the world, and I'll say the thermals weren't bad on this prototype. I had it running with write activity going for more than an hour, and it came through as follows. I had the system, as I say, mentioned with full population of both the M.2s and the hard drives there, and after an hour of sustained write onto the hard drives there, I saw temperatures around the front panel of around 43 degrees, with around 41 on the M.2 for Wi-Fi. I wasn't connecting with Wi-Fi. The side panel around 39 degrees, and the top around 37. On the rear, where I could see around that vapor chamber and the connections, it was around 48 degrees. And when I tilted the device ever so slightly, I could see around 40 degrees there on the base. Now, just like its predecessor unit, it's not rocking out with a NAS operating system, at least as I know it at this time. As I understand it, the device is rocking out with that standard Windows on a SD card included with it. Indeed, this device arrived with not only 16 gig of RAM, it also arrived with a 1 TB SSD inside. But because this isn't at retail yet, I don't know if that's what it's going to become in the end. But it did arrive with Windows. It did arrive with the Windows sticker there on the bottom there with the license sorted out. But again, prototype. But one thing I did want to talk about is noise. Because it doesn't have a NAS software, I wasn't able to play with the fan too much. And again, because this isn't going to be what the final device is going to be in its fullest form, I have to be a little bit reserved about what this prototype that almost no one will ever own can deliver upon. And in terms of noise, it delivered, again, at idle, with the drives just sitting there in standby, around 29 to 31 dBA. And when I had the device with the drives being written to there, again, a noisy environment like I'm in right now. It's a big old noisy road outside with plenty of traffic, thank you very much. It was around 36 to 39 dBA. Let's listen to those now. I make no bones that I really like this brand. I've talked about them lots of times before, and one of the reasons I like them is, in the world of NAS, even if it wasn't 2026 AI-ageddon, and frankly getting harder and harder for a user to make their first steps into the world of NAS, it's getting harder and harder to find unique NAS. With, as happens in any industry, eventually the Googleification of anything happens, where just like the Wild West days of internet search engines, and it went down to about 3 offerings, and it's happening now with AI, in the world of NAS, when it got really, really colourful and interesting and diverse, suddenly we're seeing a lot of uniformity. And I bloody love it when a brand mixes with the form. And this, in its compact form, one of the very reasons the 2-bay was so appealing, hopefully all of that vibe translates into this 4-bay. I've got no idea about the pricing. I look off screen to the notes. Right now, the 2-bay N150 version, so that's got a terabyte SSD, 16 gig, and that N150 quad-core Intel processor there, knocks around for about $559. If you downgrade the RAM to 12 gig with the N95 CPU and only 128 gig SSD for your operating system, it goes down to about $400 to $450. That means this is almost certainly going to sit somewhere between $400 and $550. I don't think it will go that high. I don't think. It really comes down to when this does eventually roll out, the RAM and the SSD, less so the CPU, and of course the further variations that follow. But I really want to see this device in as many permutations as possible, and I want to see them selling these chassis empty, because I do think there's a demand for it, and I do think for easy migration it is something that is massively missing in the world of DIY build your own NAS, because so many users now, to save them time and energy and keep things cost efficient, they're buying ready built OS empty NAS boxes there. And yes, if you're running a true NAS build, you can take your drive, stick it in something else, and TrueNAS will see the array. I get that. But these days, with more tailored turnkey NAS solutions in the market, where there's a lot of apps at play and a lot of utilities and mobile and desktop clients as well, convenience is key. And the idea that I could run some of the newer generation of NAS operating systems, your FIGO, your Zimmer, whatever, and then put them on these with a physical way to much more easily migrate onto a new system and not worry about drive LUN numbers as much, not worry about migration and compatibility of CPUs. The fact that you could just pull the board out of your 2-bay in a year or two from now if you wanted to and stick it in a new 4-bay chassis, mwah, chef's kiss. But let's talk about it more in the comments. Again, cheers again to Beelink sending this. They're not paying for this review. They didn't, well, it's not even a review. They're not paying for this video. They didn't want this video to happen, yet here we are. I look forward to talking to you more in the comments. I'll link towards their pages and what they've put out so far on this. And hopefully we'll have this in for a real bona fide big boy review very soon. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.